stuff. Right, let's dive straight in. What's your first tip for us today?
Tip number one is to be clear and follow through. So, just for a bit of background, I'm going to try and make the tips, as general as I can. And also just to say that, all of these tips I've made mistakes on in the past. I wouldn't want people to think that, I'm by any means an expert on them or always have been or invented them or anything like that. When I was sitting down to think about these, they're all things that certainly in the beginning of my teaching career, I went wrong on. And also to say that obviously, as you just heard, I'm the head of maths at Michaela. I've been working at Michaela for a number of years now. My context is very different, I suppose, to quite a few people. So just to dive in with the tip, I say my context is different. What I mean by that is that the behaviour at Michaela really is impeccable everywhere. You really need to see it to believe it, and I do recommend people come to visit. You can do that really easily through our website. But when I first saw the school, I just really couldn't believe how the kids were behaving. They're just in and out of their lessons. They're sat paying attention to the teacher, and that really was very contrasting with how my previous school experience was. I did teach first before joining Michaela, so I know a lot of people will know what that experience is like. And so, my first tip of being clear and following through, the reason I'm saying that is because I think that really underpins a lot of the behavioural foundations at the school, and that's what results in the fantastic behaviour that you see everywhere. Obviously, there's a lot of detail that goes into the final product at Michaela, but that's one of the main principles. And the kind of order I'm going to do my tips today, I hope goes in order of, a sensible order of, if you employ these tips in this order, you can, if you do tip number one, that leads to tip number two, etc. So the first one about being clear and following through is just to say that kids obviously really, really value clarity. They need to be clear on what the rules are, or they're not going to be able to follow the rules that you have. And that obviously links in really hugely to consistency as well. The more clear and consistent you can be as a teacher, the more you're going to see results in the children. And that is obviously within your own classroom and also across classrooms, if you're able to achieve that, maybe within a department or within a school. Of course, what we have at Michaela is all the teachers, following exactly the same rules, which are really clearly laid out to the kids, and following them through, in the same way across all the different classrooms. And that really is the thing that results in, the miracle that is Michaela that I walk around in every day. But where this can apply to people who, people might be listening and thinking, oh, Charlie, what's the point of you talking about Michaela? I can't do anything about that in my own room. Well, I think, there are some fundamentals of what we're doing that you can apply in your own classroom. Certainly, I remember when I was, back in my own room in that sort of island that you're in often in a teach first school. If you can lay out to the kids in the beginning, okay, here are the things that really matter to me, here are the things that I'm going to care about and I'm going to follow through on, they are much more likely to do those things. So, for me, one of the massive things in the beginning was not being spoken over. I'm sure everyone's had the experience of desperately trying to teach fractions or, equations or whatever it is, and the kids are just essentially talking over you. And, it's hard for me to think back to that these days because it feels so far away, but it did happen. So in the beginning, it's I'm not going to be spoken over. That's just something that's not going to happen. And in order to build a classroom with mutual respect where we're all going to make progress, you're not going to be speaking over me. So that's the clarity end of it, to set that up in the first place, and then following through is then, when it happens, when inevitably kids do speak over you, which will happen, you must stick to your guns and deliver, whatever sanction you have available to you. Often, demerits or a warning on the board or whatever it is, or, whatever systems you have available to you, you've got to follow through on that point. And, that applies, of course, to behaviour in the classroom like I'm talking about, but it also applies to homework, anything really involving the children. Be super clear, follow through.
I love it. Right, let's dig into this a little bit deeper, Charlie. Can you give us an example of a few more of these rules that you would have, either ones that are school-wide or ones that are personal to you in your classroom? So we've got the don't talk over me. Just give us another selection, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So I'll go through some of the ones we have at Michaela, because that might give people a flavour for how we do things here. So, another one of the big expectations that we like to lay out early on is for projection in lessons, what we call projection. So that's pupils just speaking loudly enough to be heard. And there's a few levels to why that's important. Obviously, kids need to speak loudly so that everyone in the room can hear them, so that everyone in the room can learn from them, and so that you as a teacher can hear them and learn from them, and be able to respond to what they've said. But there's also the level at which kids should just be learning to speak loudly and confidently in order to be, productive members of society when they're older, and to come across confidently in interview and things like that. Now, so we have that expectation. We're very clear about it. Every teacher across the school is always speaking about it all the time. You got to project, you got to project. So the clarity is absolutely there, and the kids get that right from the beginning. And then we will follow through on that, both with the positive and with the negative, to be clear. I wouldn't want people to think that this is all a big negative. Oh, you've got to speak loudly or we're going to be after you and we're going to give you demerits. It's not like that at all. And I'll come on to that, a bit more of that warmth actually in another tip later. But, we will give, on one hand, merits for kids speaking really loudly, and of course we'll follow through. If kids are kind of persistently not speaking loudly enough, then they might pick up demerits. And yeah, that's one more example of where we follow through.
Give us one more, Charlie, whilst we're on a roll with this, if that's okay.
Yeah, okay, one more. I suppose, it's in a way difficult to pinpoint one because there's so many we have around the school. Okay, so here's another easy one. We expect silence in the corridors. I know that's a controversial one sometimes in the world of education, but that's a nice obvious, clear one for people to have in their heads, and it's one of the things that results in just a school that runs incredibly slickly, and it's really clear. We say to kids, you're not to speak in the corridors. They walk in very orderly, silent, single file to their next lesson. If they were in the corridors, to turn around and speak to the person behind them or in front of them, or just do something silly and a bit unprofessional, then we would follow through on that. We have duties all around the school to make sure that happens. Obviously, this is part of what I'm saying about follow through, that there's no point in having the rule that you must have silent corridors and being really clear about that if you aren't then going to follow through on it. And that means, having the kind of presence around the school with the staff body to make sure that those rules are followed. And the positive side of that is that you then have corridors where not only the pupils are behaving and being silent and moving to their lessons in an orderly way, but you also have this kind of lovely, kind of joyous atmosphere where all the pupils are saying good afternoon, miss and sir, to the teachers as they go past. You have a little bit banter with the kids, you're kind of hurrying them along, and it's this kind of lovely, very warm, positive atmosphere that's created. But the foundation of that atmosphere is that actually we will follow through on the rules that we've set out.
This is great, Charlie. I want to dig into these two aspects, the clarity and the follow-through, if that's okay. So an error I've made is I go big on these classroom expectations, first lesson in September. So this is how the classroom's going to be, and so on and so forth. And maybe if I'm feeling particularly organised, I'll stick up some kind of poster of these are the kind of ways that we behave in this classroom and so on. Or maybe the school has got you often see this in schools, a behaviour expectations kind of poster or list that goes at the front of every classroom or somewhere on the classroom. But inevitably, as September ticks on into October and November, these rules, they start to kind of, we experience a more kind of trickle down version of them, and you start to let things go with certain kids and certain classes and so on. And I can feel it happening, and I know it's wrong, and it just happens all the time. So I'm interested first in this clarity aspect, particularly that second rule that you explained about the projection. I mean, that'll strike a lot of people as, whoa, that's an interesting one. Until I'd spoken to Danny Quinn, I'd never heard of that as kind of a rule. But I guess this applies to all rules. How do you get that clarity? Is it a combination of you modelling it? Do the kids have access to it written down anywhere? Do you practice it? How do you get that clarity?
Sure, yeah. So on a whole school level, you might have heard before about the boot camp that we run at the start of school when year 7
join. Tell us about that, Charlie.
Sure, yeah. So, that's a huge part of the successful running of the school, to be honest with you. So in the very first week of September, we have all the new year 7s coming into school, and we have none of the other pupils arriving at school yet, except the year 11s who were in for their revision for their GCSEs. But what that means is we have, almost an empty building and lots of members of staff, and importantly, the really experienced staff on hand to make sure that the Year 7s are inducted into the systems we have at Michaela. Now that serves the kind of dual benefit of not only inducting the Year 7s, but also inducting new staff that we have to come join the school. So often the new staff, of course, aren't used to the systems, they aren't used to the rules, they aren't used to how to deliver a lesson in a Michaela way, because there is such a particular style, and it's a style that I think really works. So that's a chance for the kids, the Year 7s, and the new teachers both to be inducted into that culture and into all the systems and rules. And, it's a really amazing sight every year. I've gone through this a number of times now. The pupils in Year 7, they arrive to us on that first day, and honestly, they're a bit of a rabble, so... Their behaviour is kind of all over the place. They kind of don't know what they're doing. They're walking in all different directions. They can't look us in the eye and treat us with full sentences, and they don't speak loudly enough for us to hear. And then they generally have bad habits in terms of their concentration. They don't look at the teacher throughout the lesson. Just all manner of bad habits. You can imagine the picture. And then the real miracle, and this is amazing, is that within a few days, and certainly by the end of the week, the pupils have just transformed. They just have their habits are miles better than they were when they arrived. And they're speaking loudly, they can look you in the eye, they're speaking in full sentences, they pay attention in lessons, they're behaving themselves around the school, they're orderly, and they're happier. That's the crazy thing. They are so much happier for it. They arrive kind of, I suppose, a bit nervous, and that's natural, but just generally seeming upset, and they're just so much happier for the order that we provide. And that's generated through obviously an amazing push from all the staff here on the consistency, and, as I'm saying, the clarity and the follow through, and all the other things that make Michaela great. And that there's so much. I could speak for hours, but I won't.
So if we just drill in on this projection one, then how are you teaching the kids to project? Are you kind of saying this is the kind of level that we speak at? Now can you try, and is it written down anywhere? I know booklets often play a key role in some of your work.
Yeah, so there are boot camp booklets. So the kids will, in that Year 7 boot camp, they'll have that written on paper in front of them at some point. But it's not so much about it being written down on paper. That's more to remind us to go through it with the kids. But then what will happen is there's just a culture in the school of we all speak loudly, and that because that is a thread that runs through every single lesson in the building, you can guarantee it. And new staff are inducted into that kind of culture, so it happens. Then the kids end up rising to that challenge, so it's not so much here's how loud you speak and now you're going to do it. Now, of course, there is a bit, as a teacher, you will be speaking loudly and you'll be saying to the pupils, look how loudly I'm speaking, I'm coming across confidently, this is how to come across confidently as a person, you need to be speaking loudly like this. And the lovely thing is that from the first day or two of boot camp, there will be pupils in the class who straight away get that point, and then they start speaking really loudly, and then you can point to X person in the class and say, look, this person's doing it well, this is how you do it, that's a merit, love it, fantastic, da 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 da, and you really praise that person, and it just sets that standard for the rest of the class, and they pretty quickly get the idea of what that looks like. And because it's happening everywhere, it doesn't slip, and then it happens like magic.
That's great. And well, let's turn to the other side, the follow-through side, because this is something I'm bad at as well. Because again, you're writing names on the board or wherever, and then it's more work for you. You've got to organise maybe a detention or type something up on Sims or something like that. And I just think, can I be bothered? But I know it's the wrong thing to do. So tell me about these follow-throughs. You mentioned demerits, potentially detentions. Just talk us through how that system works, Charlie, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Look, you've got the systems that are there, and I hope that a lot of people listening to this might have similar systems. These exist everywhere. It's just essentially a warning, which we call a demerit, and then a detention after that, and then you have an on-call system where the pupils will be sent out of the lesson if they do that 3 times. Now, that is happening very, very rarely, I have to say, in the building. And the reason that is happening rarely is because we know here not to over-rely on those systems. The systems are there to support you, and they're really, really important. But you also, as a teacher, and I'm going to be straying into my other tips here, but as a teacher, you have to be a source of energy and enthusiasm, and you have to draw the kids in, and there's an element of performance to teaching that you mustn't miss. And it's a mistake that I made very much in the early days of my teaching, which is that I thought when I heard about Michaela, or I was reading about Michaela, I thought that it was all and only about the systems, and I pretty quickly realised that actually there's so much more to it than that. It really is performance. You have to bring some charisma to the table, and you have to try and show the kids why you love the subject and why you love them, and draw them in. Now, to answer your specific question, of course, if you're doing all of those performance type things in front of the children, and we train new staff at that, and people come, and this absolutely includes me, people come to the school not knowing how to teach in a Michaela way, not teaching in a way that is really energetic and purposeful and full of charisma necessarily. So you don't have to come as Mr. Charisma to the school. It's not like that at all. I wasn't that in the least. I was Mr. Wooden, if anything. But then the other staff at Michaela, they come and they give you a bit of feedback, which is so useful to hear. You get to watch all the other staff teaching in a Michaela way. You slowly get used to what it's like to teach here, and then before you know it, you've transformed in the way that you teach, and you're actually engaging the kids on a performance level. But of course, if it comes down to it, you will have to follow those systems. We do all follow those systems, and enforcing them consistently is what means that we get the excellent behaviour that we do.
Got it. Just a couple more on this, Charlie. I could talk to you about this all day, because it's one of... I mean, Michaela fascinates people just generally, and people have preconceptions about it and so on and so forth. But obviously there's far more to it than the behaviour side, but I think often the behaviour and the rules is what people kind of latch onto. So I just want to clear up a couple of things. With the detentions, how are they run? Is that the person who set the detention runs them, or are they run centrally or within departments? Just how do they run, Charlie?
Yeah, they run centrally. So after school, there's detentions that the pupils are kind of read a list of who's in detention, and then they will go to a centrally run system, which is in one of our halls.
Got it. That's great. And my final question is, I'm interested, do you have any rules that are kind of bespoke to your classroom that aren't kind of universal, kind of school-governed rules, if that makes sense?
No, interestingly, and I know maybe some people are thinking, oh wow, that's really, weird or crazy that you would not have any rules in your own classroom that are different to the rest of the school. But the reason for that is because if I had rules in my own classroom that I thought made sense and I thought worked and were working for the kids, I'd be banging on Catherine's door and I'd be saying, Miss Burblesing, I've got a rule that's working in my classroom. We all need to be doing it, So we have a way, we have a vision of what good teaching looks like at the school, and I think our results have been showing that is absolutely working. And you need only visit the school to see that it's working. Honestly, I knew, I came to visit the school back when it only had up to year 9 here, so there were no results to speak of. But I walked around this school and I was blown away by what I was seeing, absolutely blown away. And that is because there's a vision of what good teaching should look like, and we all aspire to that vision. And if there were bits and pieces that we thought were wrong in that vision, we just adjust, and that happens all the time. There was a number of years ago, we didn't do any partner talk in the school. We introduced partner talk, and now that's a really fundamental feature of all Michaela lessons. So we're always pushing forward, I hope, on what we think good teaching looks like, and really trying to strive for how can we be better, how can we be better, how can we teach the kids more, how can we get them better grades, how can we make them into better people at the end of the day. And so that means that that consistency of vision means, no, I don't have extra rules, and I don't think you would find anyone in the school with extra rules. Now, that's not to say that if you walk into every classroom, you're going to see literally identical teaching. Of course, you get different styles. You get some people who are, one particular way, some people who are very sort of maybe sweet, and that's their kind of thing, or maybe some people who are kind of a bit more funny, a bit more of a comedian, a bit more kind of banter. But you will see bits of all of that in everyone's teaching, and the rules are the same everywhere.
Got it. Fantastic.